Fox News alert. The Biden White House is under investigation, and Trump's got a new nickname for the big guy. He's now called the Autopen. Bondi and her team are investigating whether Biden was competent and whether others were taking advantage of him. Did the Autopen know what it was signing? The Autopen signed 8,000 pardons. But did Joe know? Was the pen going behind Joe's back and letting Hunter sign with it? Did Dr. Jill use the pen? Did donors? We're not sure, but we're finally going to get answers.
When you look at these last-minute Biden pardons, the big ones, Biden siblings, Fauci, January 6th committee.
That's right.
Most of the big ones have the same very neat signature. We would expect that probably to be the Autopen. Is this White House of the opinion that the only pardon that would count is one that the president signed himself?
The president is making a good point when he discusses the usage of the Autopen. Who was running the country for the past 4 years? Perhaps those documents were signed with the Autopen. As you saw, Ed Martin made an announcement at the Department of Justice this morning to launch an investigation because the American people deserve answers.
Donald Trump had his hand an inch from the Bible, about to be sworn in a second time. And the Autopen was on a pardon bender. The Heritage Foundation did their own investigation. Quote, "We gathered every document we could find with Biden's signature over the course of his presidency. All used the same Autopen signature, except for the announcement that the former president was dropping out of the race last year." Then they did a side-by-side. These are the signatures from Biden's final day. Pardons for the family, the J6 committee, Fauci, Milley, all neatly signed, identical. This 82-year-old's penmanship never wavered, not even a smidge. But this goes back decades. The Autopen was first used regularly by President Truman. He used it for simple stuff like thank you notes, nothing serious. Obama changed that. Barry had a portable Autopen that he used in Europe to sign major legislation. First time a machine ever signed an actual bill. The pen was the best kept secret in the Oval. It lives in the White House, typically in the Office of Presidential Records. How does it work? Simple. The president gives a thumbs up, the doc gets stacked, Autopen goes to work, and then a final verification. W's Justice Department codified it. They said, yeah, Autopen counts, but one catch. Quote, "We emphasize that we are not suggesting the president may delegate the decision to approve and sign a bill. Only that, having made this decision, he may direct a subordinate to affix the president's signature on the bill." The big question, did Biden direct someone to sign his name or not? Or did aides have free rein? Speaker Johnson says Biden was out of the loop.
Sir, why did you pause LNG exports to Europe? Like, I don't understand, liquefied natural gas is in great demand by our allies. Why would you do that? Because you understand, we just talked about Ukraine. You understand you're fueling Vladimir Putin's war machine because they got to get their gas from him, And he looks at me stunned with this, and he said, I didn't do that. And I said, Mr. President, yes, you did. It was an executive order 3 weeks ago. And he goes, no, I didn't do that. And he's arguing with me. He genuinely did not know what he had signed.
Even Biden's West Wing knew the Autopen was the real chief. Two former White House sources said a top Biden aide may have gone rogue, using the Autopen like it was their own magic wand. Crypto czar David Sachs says Pocahontas wielded the wand.
What the Biden administration was doing, and let's face it, it wasn't Biden. Elizabeth Warren controlled the Autopen during that administration. She, for some reason, has this pathological hatred of the crypto community. She wants to drive this community offshore. She doesn't want it happening in the United States. That's the wrong policy for the United States.
If Biden didn't approve the use of the Autopen for a certain order, then that's forgery. It's falsifying a federal document. That's a major felony. Also, if the president isn't competent to be president, then he's not competent to use the Autopen. All the books, all the videos, all the chaos we saw for 4 years could be used as evidence to prove he wasn't competent. Investigators should be looking at emails from White House insiders discussing Autopen protocol. A smoking gun document or a whistleblower could blow the whole thing wide open and invalidate pardons, executive orders, even legislation.
What's good, Patriots? Welcome to FDL, where we torch fake news with the raw, unfiltered truth. I'm your host, and today we're tearing into a New York Times article that's got the swamp shaking in their loafers. Biden says he made the clemency decisions that were recorded with Autopen. This is a bombshell that proves President Trump was right all along about the deep state's slimy tricks. So grab your red hats, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and let's dive into this Maga masterpiece. All right, Patriots, buckle up for a wild ride through the swamp's latest meltdown. The New York Times dropped a piece today titled "Biden Says He Made the Clemency Decisions That Were Recorded with Autopen," and let me tell you, this isn't just a news story, it's a historic gut punch to the deep state and a shining moment for Trump's America First movement. This article lays bare how Joe Biden's White House was a circus of unelected bureaucrats running the show while Sleepy Joe was off chasing ice cream trucks. We're gonna break it down, roast it to a crisp, and show why the scandal is a pivotal chapter in American history that proves why we need Trump now more than ever. Let's get savage.
Over the course of administration, certainly your signature can change. So the Autopen is usually reflective of the most current signature. What we notice is that Joe Biden's signature never changed over the course of those 4 years, which, back to your point, shows and shows good evidence that this was always the Autopen. There was never a physical signature. I do have sources at the White House that said that President Biden utilized the Autopen more than any other president in our history. And when you talk about, well, who assigns the Autopen, at the end of the day, all eyes should be looking at the staff secretary. The staff secretary sits in the West Wing, is in constant communication with the president or whoever is pulling the strings in Joe Biden's case. And they're the ones that facilitate from the start to the finish, all the drafts, all the legal jargon, using the Office of General Counsel, say it's domestic policy or National Security Council. They're the conduit between all of those facets. And then when it's finally ready to go pen to paper, the staff secretary instructs for Autopen. So I would be looking at the staff secretaries. It was Neera Tanden. President Biden had 3, and that's pretty normal for the turnover. But Neera Tanden, Stephanie Feldman, and Jessica Hertz, of which 2 of those were under the Domestic Policy Council, which you could probably assume were the spearheaders for some of those very progressive agendas.
First, let's unpack what the Times is admitting here. The article says Biden didn't even bother signing his own clemency orders. Thousands of pardons and commutations, including some of the most outrageous in history, were stamped with an Autopen. That's right, a robot pen was playing president while Joe was probably lost in a Delaware basement mumbling about corn pop. The Times claims Biden personally made every single one of those decisions, but let's be real, does anyone buy that? This is the guy who couldn't find his way off a stage without a handler. You're telling me he was meticulously reviewing 4,000 clemency cases? That's like believing AOC could balance a checkbook or Kamala Harris could win a debate without giggling like a hyena. Total clown show. The article lays out the whole shady process, and it's straight out of a deep state playbook.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning about how the cover-up of President Biden's mental decline endangered America's national security and undermined the Constitution. The U.S. Constitution vests executive power in a single person, the president. At the founding, the president exercised the executive power through only a small group of trusted advisors and personnel. In fact, President Washington had a 4-member cabinet. Today, the president directs a Leviathan executive branch with 15 cabinet departments and at least 4 million full-time executive branch employees. The executive branch proliferation has a single source of democratic legitimacy, that by order of U.S. Constitution's Article 2, the president is both elected by the American people and vested with the executive power, all of it. Traditionally, the president takes positive actions and authenticates those actions through his signature. His signature is required for the most significant actions he may undertake: to sign an executive order, to take any action invested in him by the Constitution, as in granting a pardon, and to take the most important action of all, to sign a bill into law. In all these cases, the president's signature is itself the protection of democratic principle. When the president signs, he communicates his assent and endorsement of the action he takes. The Autopen is a device that signs the president's signature to a document. The Oversight Project, of which I am a board member, has discovered that the Biden White House deployed an Autopen to affix President Biden's signature to pardons, prison commutations, executive orders, and presidential proclamations. The Oversight Project's research has found that the Biden White House first deployed the Autopen to affix President Biden's signature to a proclamation on day 5 of his administration, and that there were at least 3 different Autopen signatures in use throughout President Biden's tenure in the White House. In June 2022, the Biden White House began deploying the Autopen to sign clemency warrants and executive orders. Autopen use skyrocketed from there. We found that of the 51 clemency warrants issued during the Biden presidency, over half, 32 in total, were signed with an Autopen. And these include some of the most controversial acts of clemency of the Biden presidency, including death row commutations and the preemptive pardons of members of the Biden family, Dr. Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and more that were issued in the final days of the Biden presidency. We reviewed President Biden's schedule and his publicly available media and were unable to find any record of President Biden's personally approving these actions, such as a statement issued by the president himself to reporters. In addition, we found that the Biden White House used the Autopen to affix President Biden's signature to clemency warrants and executive orders while the president himself was in Washington, D.C. for at least some of that day, and thus was presumably available to sign important executive actions. Finally, we found multiple days where President Biden wet signed a bill into law, but used an Autopen to issue an executive order or for other important executive actions. The Biden White House's widespread use of an Autopen to affix President Biden's signatures to documents that exercise executive powers belonging solely to the president poses significant constitutional, legal, and practical considerations. Once the president's signature is copied and loaded into the Autopen, the machine can sign documents as the president himself would. To be blunt, by using the Autopen, anyone can sign documents as the president himself. Now, to be clear, I'm not here today to suggest that the Autopen is bad. It's just technology. I'm here today because of questions concerning President Biden's capacity and whether the Autopen was used to usurp presidential power or to conceal the president's decline. As the sitting president's mental acuity declined, potentially to the point of incapacitation, his administration's expansion of the powers of the presidency raises more questions than answers. Any investigation into this matter should focus not only on whether President Biden directed or authorized subordinate staff to take action in certain instances, but whether he had the capacity to do so at all. The 25th Amendment lays out clear procedures for what to do when the president is incapacitated. It was carefully drafted and informed by our nation's history. The Biden administration ignored it all to aggrandize executive power and push the country further in their preferred ideological direction. It is our obligation at this point to get to the bottom of these issues and to ask the important question as to whether or not the Autopen and other devices were used to cover and obscure President Biden's mental decline, undermining our national security and also the Constitution.
Biden's staff secretary, Stephanie Feldman, was the ringleader, orchestrating a system where aides like Jeff Zients and Ed Siskel would get oral instructions from Biden, whatever that means. Probably him slurring something about chocolate chip ice cream. Those instructions were then passed to assistants who weren't even in the room, who'd write up little blurbs to confirm Biden's so-called decisions. Only then would Feldman fire up the Autopen to churn out pardons like a vending machine spitting out candy bars. The Times calls this a process. I call it a scam. It's a bureaucracy designed to bypass the president entirely, letting unelected goons push their radical agenda while Joe napped. It smells worse than a DC landfill in August, folks. Now let's talk about the clemency itself, because this is where it gets juicy.
Can that authority be transferred to a staffer or a machine without the president's explicit authorization?
Never.
And if you look at the statistics are stunning. In 2021, President Biden issued 78 executive orders. None were signed with an Autopen. That first year of the presidency, Biden, I suppose, was relatively lucid, and 78 executive orders he signed by hand. The second year, however, we see the Autopen emerge. The first Autopen executive order was issued on July 15th, 2022. After that day, 100% of the executive orders issued in 2022 were signed by an Autopen. In 2023, Biden issued 24 executive orders. 16 were Autopenned. In 2024, Biden issued 19. 14 were auto-penned. In 2025, Biden issued 14 executive orders. Every single one was auto-penned.
We have a problem. Something was going on, and we need answers.
Biden's team used this autopen to pardon or commute sentences for nearly 4,000 people, and the choices are pure chaos. First, they cut loose inmates who were sent to home confinement during the pandemic. Why? Because apparently locking up criminals is too mean when there's a virus floating around. Never mind that crime rates were spiking while Biden's DOJ was turning our cities into Gotham without Batman. Then they commuted sentences for nonviolent drug offenders, which the Times spins as compassionate, but let's call it what it is, a green light for the same soft-on-crime policies that turned San Francisco into a needle-strewn dystopia. And here's the kicker, Biden commuted the death sentences of 37 out of 40 federal death row inmates, flipping them to life without parole. But he left 3 behind. Why? Because their crimes, like terrorism or mass murder hate crimes, were too heinous even for Joe's woke fan club. So, Joe's out here playing God with a robot pen while his handlers pick winners and losers. Disgusting. But wait, it gets spicier. The article casually mentions Biden's preemptive pardons for his family, like his son Hunter, and political allies like Anthony Fauci, General Mark Milley, and the entire January 6th committee crew, including Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff. This isn't just clemency, it's a deep state panic move. Hunter Biden, convicted on gun and tax charges, got a pardon covering 11 years of potential crimes. 11 years. That's not a pardon, that's a blank check for the Biden crime family to keep grifting. Fauci, the lockdown czar who pushed masks and mandates while dodging lab leak questions, got a shield. Milley, the general who thought woke book clubs were more important than military readiness, got a pass. And the January 6th committee? They spent years witch-hunting Trump supporters, and Biden's team made sure they're untouchable. Why? Because they knew Trump was coming back in 2025, and these pardons were a desperate attempt to block his investigations into their swampy schemes. It's like the deep state threw a Hail Mary and it landed in a dumpster fire. Now, let's talk about why this Autopen scandal is a seismic shift in American history.
To what Axios reporter Alex Thompson had to say about the inner circle controlling Biden at the end of his term. Watch this.
The people that were in charge were Mike Donilon, Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, Anthony Bernal, the First Lady's chief of staff, the First Lady, and Annie Tomasini. Those were the people that saw him the most and that had the most control over what he was doing and his day-to-day.
Well, clearly, Congressman, he is naming names. And we have the Washington Post columnist Sally Quinn accusing former First Lady of elder abuse. What do you say to that, Congressman? Elder abuse.
It is elder abuse. It is. There's no doubt about that. And all of these officials that were in the Biden White House, as far as I'm concerned, they need to come in front of the Oversight Committee because questions need to be answered. Last thing I will say on this is, depending on when the president truly was not in control of his mental faculties, a lot of the stuff that he did as president, in my view, should be invalidated. And the reason why is because you can't use an auto pen to run the country. It has to be from the mental capabilities and the physical capabilities of the person elected to be commander-in-chief. And so if Joe Biden could not execute the duties of his office, then why are we living under a lot of the decisions that was made by the Biden White House? So there's a lot of investigations that need to occur on this matter. This is a major scandal, in my view, the biggest one in presidential history. We can now put Watergate to bed.
This isn't just about a few pardons gone wrong, it's about exposing the deep state's chokehold on our democracy. The Times article, whether they meant to or not, handed Maga a roadmap to dismantle the swamp. It proves what Trump's been saying since 2016. Unelected bureaucrats are running the show, and the presidency is just a figurehead if we let them get away with it. Biden's White House was a puppet show with aides like Zients, Feldman, and Siskel pulling the strings while Joe was propped up like a mannequin in a suit. This scandal is bigger than Watergate, it's a betrayal of the American people, and it shows why Trump's second term is a historic necessity. When Trump took office on January 20th, 2025, he didn't just win an election, he saved the republic from a shadow government. His executive order on June 4th, 2025, launching a probe into Biden's auto pen use, is a masterclass in leadership. The Times admits that Trump's team, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi and White House counsel David Warrington, is digging through thousands of Biden-era emails with keywords like clemency and pardon. From November 2024 to January 2025. That's a paper trail the swamp can't burn fast enough. Trump's not just going after the pardons, though let's be real, those January 6th committee pardons are as legit as a knockoff Rolex. He's exposing a system where unelected aides hijacked the presidency.
Your committee have to find to make the determination that these EOs, these laws are null and void?
Who gave the authority for the low-level staffers to take that document, put it in the Autopen, and press power to sign Joe Biden's name? Because many of those documents were signed on days where Joe Biden wasn't anywhere near the White House. There's no evidence of any email communication between the president and these staffers. We have the Hur report where Robert Hur sat down at length with Joe Biden and concluded that he couldn't even sit in front of a jury because he couldn't even remember the date of his election and of tragic events in his family's life and things like that. So there's plenty of evidence that Joe Biden wasn't mentally fit to make a lot of these decisions. We want to know who actually gave the authority to do these executive orders and these pardons, because again, I think the American people have seen up close and personal, especially during that debate with Donald Trump, that Joe Biden wasn't at the top of his game. This physician, Dr. O'Connor, he continued to give reports saying he was mentally fit and in perfect health. Now we know otherwise, so that's why we're bringing them in.
This is about restoring trust in our institutions, ensuring no president can be sidelined by a machine while the deep state runs amok. The historical impact here can't be overstated. This scandal draws a line in the sand. Either we let bureaucrats rule, or we fight for a government by the people. Trump's MAGA movement is about taking back power for Americans, and this Autopen fiasco is Exhibit A for why we need him. His investigations are already shaking things up. The Times mentions House Oversight Chairman James Comer and interim U.S. Attorney Ed Martin are on the case, looking into whether Biden's aides conspired to deceive the public about his mental state. Spoiler alert, they did. The DOJ itself said Biden was too incompetent to stand trial, so how was he competent to pardon thousands? It's a question that could unravel the entire Biden legacy, assuming he had one worth keeping. And let's pour some savage sauce on this. The New York Times, the same outlet that's been slandering Trump for a decade, accidentally handed Maga a nuke. They thought they were writing a puff piece to defend Joe, but they ended up exposing the deep state's playbook. It's like they hired a blindfolded intern to write their propaganda, and he tripped into the truth. Biden's defense is laughable. He told The Times, "I made every single one of those decisions," and blamed Trump for questioning him because they've done so badly. Bro, your approval rating was lower than a snake's belly in a wagon rut. Your team was signing pardons with a robot while you were sundowning on live TV. Take a seat, Joe, and let the adults handle this.
Ducey here outside the West Wing of the White House, and there's rarely a good reason to bring a prop to a White House briefing. But this afternoon, after spending a couple hours going through justice.gov with a color printer, I had an idea. There is one that looks different. It looks authentic. In fact, if you look at the last name, it almost looks like the president was having a hard time spelling his last name there.
Very interesting props if you want to bring them to my office later so I can take a closer look.
Joe Biden was the president. He signed so many different things. Why was the one thing he signed the day before he left so messy?
The Times tries to downplay the Autopen by saying other presidents, including Trump, used it. Nice try, but here's the difference. Trump used it for ceremonial stuff, like signing letters to Eagle Scouts or thank you notes. Biden's team used it to rewrite the criminal justice system and protect their cronies from justice. That's not a signature, that's a coup. When Trump called these pardons void on March 17, 2025, he wasn't just flexing, he was dropping a constitutional truth bomb. The Constitution doesn't require a president to physically sign pardons, but it does assume they're mentally present. If Biden was too far gone to stand trial, how was he calling the shots on 4,000 clemency cases? It's a question that could spark lawsuits, congressional hearings, and maybe even a Supreme Court showdown. And you know Trump's ready for that fight.
Because the Democrats have really hurt our country. And we are going to go into very much so. Remember what I said, the Autopen. This government was illegally run for 4 years. Thank you very much, everybody.
Let's zoom out for a second. This scandal isn't just about Biden's failures, it's about Trump's vision for America. His second term is a historic cleanup operation, and the Autopen fiasco is the perfect launchpad. He's not just reversing pardons, he's dismantling the deep state's infrastructure. The Times notes that Trump's DOJ is exploring whether these clemency actions were knowingly fraudulent, which could lead to criminal charges for Biden's aides. Imagine Zients or Feldman testifying under oath, trying to explain why they thought a robot pen was a substitute for a president.
Good luck. Nobody believes a Democrat anymore. Half the party just confessed to the crime of the century, and the other half's having margaritas with MS-13. When you're hooked on TDS harder than Irish Rosie on Xanax, an Autopen investigation is not what the doctor ordered. They're going to need a united front once the subpoenas start.
It's going to be must-see TV, folks, and Trump's the director. This also sets a precedent for future presidents. Trump's probe could lead to new laws or executive actions to ensure no White House can ever pull the stunt again. It's a legacy-defining moment, proving that Maga isn't just a movement, it's a firewall against tyranny. The Autopen scandal shows what happens when we let the swamp fester, and it's why Trump's fight to drain it is non-negotiable. Every patriot watching this needs to understand, this isn't just politics, it's a battle for the soul of America. And one more savage jab for the road, the irony here is delicious. The New York Times thought they were saving Biden's bacon, but they ended up serving it to Maga on a silver platter. It's like the deep state hired Wile E. Coyote to build their narrative, and he blew himself up with a dynamite stick. The Times exposed their own heroes as frauds, and now Trump's team is using that exposure to clean house. You love to see it. Patriots, the Biden Autopen scandal is a wake-up call. It's proof the deep state was running a shadow government, and it's why President Trump's leadership is the only thing standing between us and total swamp domination. This changes American history because it shows what's at stake: our democracy, our freedom, our future. Trump's fighting to make sure no president can be replaced by a robot pen and a room full of bureaucrats. So drop your thoughts in the comments, tell me how this scandal fires you up. Share this video to wake up your friends and join the FTL army by subscribing. We're fighting for freedom, truth, and liberty, and with Trump leading the charge, the swamp doesn't stand a chance. Stay based, stay vigilant, and let's make America great again.